What if I told you the greatest fighter in history won his biggest battles before he ever stepped into the ring? Muhammad Ali didn't just punch his way to glory, he spoke it, believed it, and became it. This is the story of a man who turned confidence into destiny. Muhammad Ali rose from a determined young boy to the most iconic boxer the world has ever known. Through fearless confidence, unbreakable faith, and unmatched courage, he proved that greatness begins in the mind. Ali didn't fight only opponents, he fought fear, injustice, and doubt, becoming a symbol of strength far beyond boxing. The auditorium in Louisville was a blur of noise and color for the 12-year-old boy, but his focus was singular. His new red and white Schwinn leaned carefully against the brick wall. Cassius Clay's pride in that bicycle was a palpable thing. It represented freedom, status, a sliver of personal territory in a world that often told him he had none. He left it for just moments to get free popcorn inside the Columbia Auditorium during the Black Gold Exposition. When he returned, the space against the wall was empty, a gut punch of violation. The theft was more than a loss of property, it was an erasure of his autonomy. Tears of fury hot on his cheeks, he stormed back inside, not to report the crime to a policeman, but to declare war. He found Officer Joe Martin, a local boxing coach manning a recruitment booth. "I'm gonna whoop whoever stole my bike," the boy raged, his voice trembling with impotent rage. Martin, a wiry man who had seen this anger before, looked down and offered not sympathy, but a solution. "Well, son," he said calmly, "you better learn how to fight before you go challenging people." He gestured to the posters of fighters on his booth. "You ever think about boxing?" In that catalytic instant, the trajectory of a life and of sports history veered irrevocably. The desire for violent revenge was instantly alchemically transformed into a quest of disciplined mastery. The bike was the spark, but the flame it ignited was a dream of self-creation through skill, not retaliation through chaos. Cassius showed up to Martin's Columbia gym the next day, a scrawny kid in a sea of sweating, grinding young men. He was clumsy, all arms and legs, swinging wildly at the heavy bag until he was exhausted. In early sparring sessions, he flinched, he retreated, but his eyes, even in defeat, were calculating, absorbing. He asked Martin not about trophies or glory, but with grave practicality. "How long till I'm good enough to win the Golden Gloves? The prize money's enough for a new bike, right?" The dream had a price tag, $60. Martin told him 2 years of hard work. Cassius committed on the spot. For the next 24 months, the gym became his cathedral. He shadowboxed for hours in the cracked mirror, studying the stranger he was willing into existence. The footwork drills, the punishing road work, the rhythmic tat-tat-tat of the speed bag, all of it was fueled by that initial injustice. He won the gloves, he won the AAU title, he made the Olympic team. The dream, which had begun as a means to replace a $60 bicycle, had grown into something monumental and insatiable. The night he won the gloves final, he came home and placed the exact prize money in his mother Odessa's hand. "For the house," he said. When she asked about the new bicycle, he shook his head, his gaze already fixed on a horizon far beyond their Louisville street. The stolen bike had been avenged not by its replacement, but by its utter transcendence. The insult had been metabolized into the fuel for a destiny that would require not a set of wheels, but wings. The press conference before the first Sonny Liston fight was a theater of dissonance. On one side sat the champion, Liston, a monolith of intimidating silence, his fists like pile drivers, his gaze promising pain. On the other was the cacophonous cyclone that was Cassius Clay. He didn't just speak, he performed, prophesized, and preached. "I am the greatest," he shouted to a room full of cynical, mostly white sports writers who saw not a genius, but a clown, not confidence, but pathological delusion. Liston was a 7-1 favorite. The mob was in his corner. The narrative was a foregone conclusion. The loudmouth would be brutally silenced. Yet Clay's declarations were neither madness nor mere hype. They were a sophisticated psychological operation. Every "I am the greatest" was a brick in a fortress of self-belief, constructed to withstand the siege of universal doubt. He was scripting reality, verbally building the victory before his body had to execute it. This was confidence weaponized, a tool to unnerve his opponent, captivate the media, and most crucially, to reprogram his own subconscious. By constantly vocalizing the outcome, he was making disbelief neurologically impossible for himself. He wasn't predicting the future, he was architecting it with words. The night before the fight, the bravado fell away in the quiet of his motel room. The weight of reality pressed in. The fear wasn't of Liston's fists, but of the humiliation of being wrong, of his own prophecy failing. In that vulnerable silence, he faced the mirror and repeated the incantation, not as a shout to the world, but as a whisper to his soul. I am the greatest. It was a ritual of commitment. In the ring, the weapon proved its worth. When a substance from Liston's gloves blinded him in the fourth round, panic surged. "Cut the gloves off, I'm gonna quit," he screamed to his corner. This was the ultimate test of the weapon. The physical confidence was gone. He was fighting on instinct and the foundational belief he had hammered into himself. He survived the round. When his sight cleared, the returned confidence was no longer performative but primal, vindicated. He attacked with a ferocity that broke Liston's will. At the post-fight press conference, a frenzied, triumphant Clay didn't just celebrate, he held a mirror to the world's doubt and shattered it. "I told you, I shook up the world." The weapon had worked on every level. It had psychically defeated Liston, sold the fight, and forged an unshakable internal truth. From that day forward, "I am the greatest" was no longer a claim. It was a fact he had forced the world to accept, proving that the most potent force in any arena is often the unshakable belief declared into existence. The prevailing orthodoxy of the heavyweight division in the early 1960s was a brutalist theology of mass and impact. Fighters were expected to be immovable objects and irresistible forces, trading concussive blows in a test of chin and raw power. Sonny Liston was its high priest. Then came Cassius Clay, a heretic with a new gospel. Watching film of the smaller, exquisite Sugar Ray Robinson, Clay saw not a model to avoid, but a blueprint to scale. "He's dancing, they can't hit a ghost," he told trainer Angelo Dundee. His goal was not to outmuscle the giants, but to obsolete them. He built his game on a trinity of attributes considered secondary for heavyweights: preternatural hand speed, balletic footwork, and a transcendent ring intelligence. In the gym, his training reflected this revolution. Footwork drills became intricate dances over taped grids on the floor. The speed bag was a staccato metronome for his reflexes, not a power tool. He skipped rope with a dancer's variety, building the cardiovascular engine to maintain this high-velocity style for 15 rounds. He was preparing for a different sport altogether, a game of angles, geometry, and tempo. The heresy became doctrine in the ring against Liston. Clay didn't merely avoid Liston's power, he rendered it absurd. He leaned back just out of range of monstrous hooks, making them swish through empty air with a demoralizing whoosh. He peppered Liston with flicking jabs that didn't seek to hurt, but to disorient and humiliate, followed by lightning combinations before Liston's neural pathways could even register the opening. The Ali Shuffle was the ultimate taunt, a display of kinetic superiority that said, "My tools are so refined I can waste motion and you still can't touch me." He won not by breaking Liston down, but by making him look slow, foolish, and archaic. A decade later, against the even more terrifying force of George Foreman in Zaire, Ali evolved the philosophy. Knowing he could not dance for 15 rounds against Foreman's youth and ring-cutting pressure, he unveiled the rope-a-dope. It was the strategic inversion of speed, deliberate defensive slowness. By leaning on the ropes and covering up, he allowed Foreman to exhaust his own formidable power on Ali's arms and torso. He used his defensive intelligence, the speed of his mind, to turn Foreman's greatest asset into his fatal liability. Then, in the 8th round, he transitioned from absorbed to attacker, unleashing a blinding speed-based combination that knocked Foreman out. In these two victories, Ali completed his revolution. He proved that in the ring, the most destructive force is not mass times acceleration, but intelligence times velocity. He permanently changed the heavyweight archetype, transforming it from a slugger's realm into a boxer's chessboard, where feet and wit were as important as fists. The gold medal felt lighter than he expected. Standing on the podium in Rome's Palazzetto dello Sport in 1960, the weight of the Olympic laurels around his neck, 18-year-old Cassius Clay beamed with a victor's joy. He had dazzled the world, defeating a seasoned Polish fighter in the final with a breathtaking last-round display of the speed and skill that would become his trademark. The medal was the validation of every ounce of sweat in the Columbia gym, the tangible proof of his greatness on the global stage. He wore it everywhere, slept with it, showed it to anyone who would look. It was, he believed, his ticket. A ticket to respect, to a professional career, to the adoration of his country. Returning to Louisville as a hero, he was feted by the city's black community and a syndicate of white businessmen who promised to guide his pro career. The gold was his leverage, his credibility, his shining key to the future. That key turned to iron in his hand just days later. Proudly wearing the medal under his jacket, he and a friend entered a segregated diner in his hometown. The waitress ignored them. The owner approached. "We don't serve Negroes here," he said, his voice flat. Clay, incredulous, pulled the gold medal from his shirt, letting it catch the light. "I'm Cassius Clay," he said, his voice a mix of pride and pleading. "I just won the gold medal for this country, for America." The owner's face remained a mask of indifferent bigotry. "I don't care if you're the King of England, we got rules." In that moment, the symbol of global triumph was rendered meaningless. The medal that represented the pinnacle of amateur achievement was worthless against the entrenched racism of his own land. The triumph in Rome felt like a lie, a performance for a country that saw his value only in the ring, not at a lunch counter. That night, consumed by a fury of disillusionment, he stood on the Jefferson County Bridge over the Ohio River. The story goes that he hurled the medal into the dark water, a symbolic act of rejecting an honor that his nation refused to honor in him. Whether literally true or apocryphal, the metaphor was absolute. The Olympic glory was not an end, but a brutal beginning. It was the moment the naive athlete died, and the politically conscious champion was born. Rome had taught him he could conquer the world. Louisville taught him his real fight wasn't in a ring abroad, but for dignity at home. The gold medal was merely the ignition for a much larger, more combustible engine of purpose. The Houston Induction Center on April 28, 1967 was the quietest, most deafening arena of Muhammad Ali's life. The crowd was the press, the officials, the watching nation. At the peak of his powers, 25 years old, undisputed heavyweight champion, a global icon, he was called forward by an officer. Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. He did not move. He did not flinch. His refusal was not a sudden impulse, but the culmination of a profound moral and political awakening. Drafted as 1A in 1966, he had initially quipped, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." But as the war escalated and his understanding with the Nation of Islam deepened, the quips solidified into an unshakable conviction. His inner circle begged him to reconsider. The penalties were severe: a criminal conviction, a 5-year prison sentence, massive fines, and the certain stripping of his boxing titles and license. "You got the world in your hand," his cornerman Bundini Brown pleaded. Ali's response was morally crystalline. "Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs?" His stance made him a pariah in mainstream America and a hero to the anti-war and Black Power movements. Convicted in a swift trial, he was immediately stripped of his championship by every athletic commission. The prime years of an athlete's life, 25 to 28, were stolen not by a rival's punch, but by a principle. The exile was a purgatory. He lived on the college lecture circuit, his immense physical gifts atrophying, his finances strained by legal battles. He watched lesser fighters compete for his vacated title. The doubt was a constant companion. Had he sacrificed his God-given talent for a political statement? Yet in that sacrifice, his identity transformed. He was no longer just a boxer. He was a symbol of conscience, a martyr for religious freedom and anti-imperialism. The Supreme Court's unanimous overturning of his conviction in 1971 was a legal vindication, but the greater victory had already been won in the court of public opinion and his own soul. He traded the heavyweight crown for a different kind of authority, one rooted in integrity. When he returned to the ring, he was no longer just the greatest boxer. He was Muhammad Ali, the man who stood firm, proving that some titles, even those made of gold and leather, are lighter than the weight of one's convictions.
The comeback began not with a bang, but with a question mark hanging over the ring in Atlanta on October 26, 1970. After 43 months of enforced exile, Muhammad Ali's physique was softer, his legendary footwork presumably rusty. His opponent, Jerry Quarry, was a tough, honest brawler. For the first minute, the doubt seemed justified. Ali was tentative, receiving solid blows. Then, as if a switch was thrown, the speed returned. The hands became blurs. He cut Quarry badly, stopping him in 3 rounds. The victory was a statement. The skills remained. But the true test, the one that would define the arc of his comeback, was Joe Frazier. Their first fight, the fight of the century in 1971, was Ali's first professional loss, a brutal 15-round epic where pride led him to abandon his movement and brawl with Frazier's relentless force. The defeat was a necessary humbling, a lesson that the comeback required not just the return of his body, but the wisdom to use it correctly. The comeback narrative truly crystallized in the trilogy with Frazier, culminating in the apocalyptic Thrilla in Manila in 1975. By then, Ali had regained his title by dethroning George Foreman in Zaire, using the strategic genius of the rope-a-dope. But Manila was about something raw: will. In suffocating heat, both men pushed past human limits. Ali dominated the middle rounds, then nearly broke in the later ones under Frazier's inhuman pressure. "This is the closest I've ever been to dying," he said later. When Frazier's eyes were swollen shut and his corner refused to let him answer the bell for the 15th, Ali's victory was one of survival as much as skill. The comeback was now complete. It was a narrative with 3 acts: the return against Quarry, reclamation of skill; the redemption against Foreman, reclamation of the title through intellect; and the transcendence against Frazier in Manila, reclamation of the soul through sheer will. He hadn't just returned to boxing, he had authored the greatest second act in sports history, proving that a fall of grace could be the prelude to an even greater ascent, forged in resilience and strategic brilliance. Long before the first bell, Muhammad Ali's fights were won and lost in the psychological space between his mind and his opponent's. His mastery was as much verbal and cerebral as it was physical. He understood that boxing was a theater and intimidation was a performance art. His pre-fight rituals were legendary psychological operations. He would show up at a rival's training camp to hurl insults, predicting the round of victory with chilling specificity. Before facing the seemingly invincible George Foreman, he crafted a narrative of Foreman as a slow, plodding brute, while painting himself as the people's champion, dancing for the oppressed of Zaire. He got inside Foreman's head, calling him the mummy for his slow pursuit, and planting seeds of doubt that later blossomed into frustration and exhaustion in the ring. His taunts during fights were another weapon. "You can't hit what you can't see, sucker," he'd sneer as opponents swung in air. Against a hurt opponent, his voice would drop to a merciless, intimate whisper: "You're in trouble now. It's all over." This wasn't just bravado, it was tactical psychological warfare. It confirmed an opponent's deepest fears, that they were outclassed, that their power was useless, that Ali was playing with them. The Ali Shuffle was the physical manifestation of this gamesmanship, a flashy, unnecessary footwork display meant to humiliate and demoralize, to say, "I have energy and skills to waste, and you still can't touch me." This mental pressure often forced opponents to abandon their game plans, to fight with emotion instead of strategy, making them vulnerable. His mind games extended to the media, using them as a megaphone to broadcast his psychological narrative to the world, creating a cloud of doubt that enveloped his rivals before they ever stepped through the ropes.
Ali proved that the most devastating punches are often the ones thrown with words and psychological insight, weakening the will before the body is ever touched.
Muhammad Ali's legacy is a continent, of which boxing is merely a prominent peninsula. He became a global symbol whose meaning transcended sport, embodying three universal principles: courage, equality, and resilience. His courage was displayed not in the ring, where he was paid to fight, but outside it, where he risked everything for his beliefs. His stand against the Vietnam War and his embrace of Black pride during the Civil Rights era made him a political and social icon, a beacon of defiant self-determination for oppressed people worldwide. He was unapologetically himself in a world that demanded conformity from Black athletes, transforming the role of the sports star from grateful entertainer to empowered activist. His pursuit of equality was relentless, from throwing his Olympic gold medal into the river to his affiliation with the Nation of Islam and his later embrace of universal Sufism. He forced conversations about race, religion, and justice onto the world's front pages. In his later years, battling Parkinson syndrome, his resilience became his most profound teaching. The man who once floated like a butterfly now moved with a deliberate, shaking slowness. Yet he did not hide. He presented the Olympic torch in 1996 with trembling hands, a moment of heartbreaking and inspiring fortitude that moved the world. The disease quieted his voice but amplified his presence. He became a symbol of grace under a different kind of pressure, proving that true greatness is not diminished by physical decline. Muhammad Ali's legacy is the story of a man who used the platform of boxing to fight much larger battles, for dignity, for conscience, for the human spirit. He remains the ultimate standard for what an athlete can mean, proving that the most lasting victories are not scored on judges' cards, but etched in the collective memory of humanity. Muhammad Ali taught the world this: believe in yourself loudly, stand for what you believe in boldly, and never let fear define you. He wasn't just the greatest boxer, he was proof that confidence, courage, and conviction can change the world. If this story inspired you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, "I am the greatest." Because remember, champions never quit, and legends never fade.